My name is Samaniego. My majors are political science and philosophy, and my minors are women's and gender studies and French. The title of my honors thesis is called Gender Disparities in Sentencing, a feminist analysis of women as victims and perpetrators. My thesis states that I will engage in the work of feminist scholars Kathleen Daly, Catherine McKinnon, and Kimberly Crenshaw to highlight specific ways in which the neutrality of our legal system fails to sentence people fairly, particularly women who have been subjected to the limiting classification of either victims of abuse or perpetrators of violence. I was inspired to conduct this research after learning that the average prison sentence of men who kill their female partners is 2 to 6 years, while women who kill their partners are sentenced on average to 15 years. And of the women in prison today for killing men, about 90% of them had been previously abused by those men. I want to learn what made our legal system today operate in a way that allowed for such a big disparity. So I turned to the federal sentencing guidelines, which offer a guideline for judges in how they decide their sentences. There's a variety of factors that go into determining the severity of the crime, as well as the length of the sentence. But something to note is that the sentencing guidelines specifically prohibit the use of race, sex, and socioeconomic status in determining sentences. And that's a problem. In terms of feminist analysis, feminist theorist Catherine McKinnon shows us that our legal system adopts the male point of view, which perpetuates inequality. Ultimately, women under the law are seen as a matter of sex difference, not sex discrimination. In other words, it's clear that women are different from men, but it's not clear about the structural imbalances that perpetuate sexism under the law. For example, an act of self-defense in response to domestic abuse cannot be seen as self-defense if such purported neutrality neglects the social acceptance of male domination. That's the underlying power structure. So in order to combat gender disparities in sentencing, we actually have to talk about the ways in which gender is a factor. In considering this, women may be seen as victims. Under the chivalry hypothesis, women are essentially viewed as weaker and dependent than men in a way that makes them less responsible for their crimes. Therefore, they receive more lenient sentences. There's also the concept of double deviance, which is the idea that when women commit a crime, not only are they committing a legal wrong, but they're also committing an additional social wrong by violating societal expectations and gender norms. In terms of women as perpetrators, Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality helps us understand that women aren't viewed the same. For example, the women who benefit from the chivalry hypothesis for more lenient sentences tend to be whiter, wealthier, and more educated, whereas women who have the double deviance standard applied to them are more often poor, Blacker, and less educated. This is where the idea of hermeneutical injustice comes in. This is the idea that a gap in collective interpretive resources puts someone at an unfair disadvantage when it comes to making sense of their social experiences. And the 3 women below that I have as case studies are the perfect examples of how people don't understand their stories. All 3 of these women have been abused for a significant portion of their lives, and all 3 of them ended up killing their abusers, their intimate partners. Their sentences ranged from 14 to 19 years in prison. But their domestic abuse wasn't considered. I think this is a problem with the way our legal system currently stands, so I began looking for reforms. Kathleen Daly argues for the principle of proportionality, which is the idea that the law should contextualize each individual while recognizing that marginalized groups have additional factors to take into consideration, like a history of physical and sexual abuse. Essentially, a proportional sentence reflects the level of seriousness of the crime as well as the offender's culpability. Now, there has been some current progress, specifically in New York, Oklahoma, and Oregon. These states have passed laws that allow a judge to consider evidence of abuse and potentially enter the survivor into a lesser sentencing range than they were originally eligible for, which again shows how restrictive the sentencing guidelines can be. These laws also allow the same process for people who have already been sentenced to prison to be resentenced. I believe that these three women have not had justice served to them, and that the idea of proportionality and the establishment of more laws like the New York, Oklahoma, and Oregon laws can help to ensure that everyone seeks justice under the legal system.